In this lesson, we're going to set up our project settings for our input. Alright, so in the last lesson we had started creating our blueprint for our character. We got a little bit of an introduction to the blueprint editor. We learned about class blueprints, and now we want to start creating the inputs for our character movement. This can be done through the project settings. So to access those project settings, we'll simply go to Edit and then Project Settings. Go ahead and take that tab, and you want to dock that up here just to make it a little bit easier to see. And then we're going to go over to our Engine section, and we're going to go to Input. Left click on that, and you'll see that we have this Bindings section. Now we have two different mappings that we can use. We can use an action mapping or an axis mapping. The first type of mapping we're going to talk about is the axis mapping, because this is going to allow us to use our movement. Now, actions would be something like firing a weapon, or would be something like jumping, or something like that. So we'll go ahead and we'll just work with axis mapping, then we'll come back to that. So let's go ahead and add our first mapping. Once we click on that plus symbol, you'll see this triangle come up, and you'll need to click on that to expand your first group. So let's go ahead and rename this, and we're going to go ahead and call this Move Forward. Hit enter on that, and then we'll expand that out, and you'll notice that it gives us the binding that we can use for this. So if we click on this, we can go through all of these different keys or bindings for the Move Forward axis. In this case, we want to use the W key. So we're going to scroll down, and we're going to find W. Now you'll notice the scale is set to +1. Whenever we press that W key, that's going to move us forward in the positive direction. Now I want to go ahead and add another, and I want to use an alternate button in this case. So the alternate button for moving forward would be up on the keyboard. And so I could go ahead and add that in. Now, depending on how you want to do this, you could go ahead and add your S key right now if you wanted to, so that way you could just take care of those. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and use up, and there it is. And it's going to be a positive scale of 1. So it's going to do the exact same thing. So W or up on your keyboard will allow you to move forward. All right, let's go ahead and take care of our negative direction, so moving backward. Now you might be asking, well, why don't we create a new axis for that? Well, it's not necessary, because we have this scale to allow us to use the same axis. Forward is moving along the z-axis of the character. And so positive is going to move us forward, but negative is going to move us backward. It's still along that same axis. So let's go ahead and use the S key on this one. And we're going to say -1. And then we'll also add another key to this, and we're going to use down on the keypad. And we'll also say -1. All right, so that's everything that we need for the move forward. Now, if you wanted to use a gamepad, you could also add another group to allow that. So if you expanded that, you could go ahead and say, all right, let's take a look at our gamepad here. We have a gamepad section that's close to the bottom here, and you'll see that we have several different options that we can go through. The ones that you're worried about are for movement itself would be the left stick. So we're looking for gamepad left X or gamepad left Y. So if we're moving forward, we want to use the left Y. So this means if I'm pushing the stick up, that's the Y direction. And so with something like this, I would just say scale of +1. Now, you might be asking, all right, so what about gamepad left and then doing the negative scale? Gamepads work a little bit differently. Whenever they're setting at their rest position, their scale value is actually set to 0. So if you press the Y forward, it's going to give you a scale of +1. If you're holding it down, it's going to give you a value of -1. And so it already knows how to set that up. You would just go ahead and say gamepad left Y and give it its positive value. All right? So we're not going to be using the gamepad because I don't have the ability to test that as of right now, so I'm going to go ahead and just close that down. We'll just stick to our keyboard and mouse interactions here. All right, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and add another axis mapping. And this one, we're going to call Move Right. Now, we could call it Move Left and Right if you wanted to, but I'm just going to use Move Right just to stick with the positive values on that. So go ahead and expand it. And what is the key that we want to use to move to the right? In this case, it's going to be the D key. So with D, we're going to set our scale to +1. Let's add the other one. This is going to be the right key. So we're going to look for it. There's right. And we'll leave its scale to 1 as well. Let's add in another, and let's use our negative. So this is going to be the A key. So with the A key pressed, we're going to do -1 on that. And then we're going to expand that one more time. We're going to add another group. We're going to use the left key, and we're going to do -1 on this one. Perfect. All right, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to get the player to turn. So if we're using the standard first-person type of controls, WASD will allow us to move, so move forward and then strafe left and strafe right. Then we want to be able to use the mouse to look around or to turn. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of minimize those, and we're going to add another mapping, and this one we're going to call turn. Expand that, and we're going to add in the mouse X, because this is going to allow us to move left and move right. Now with the mouse, it will recognize whether the mouse is moving to the right or it's moving to the left. So we just need the mouse X with a positive scale of 1. Let's go ahead and add in our look function now. So if we want to look up or look down, we want to use the mouse Y. So let's add in another group, and let's just call this look up and hit enter on that. Let's go ahead and use the mouse Y, and we're going to leave that scale set to 1. All right, so now we've got everything that we need for our movement using the keyboard and the mouse. Let's talk about creating a jump function, okay, or a jump action. We're going to go to our action mappings, and we're going to expand that. We're going to add one, and we'll just go ahead and call this jump. Hit enter on that, and then expand that. And then we're going to set this to the space bar. So we'll just expand this down. We'll go down to the space bar. There we go. Now, if you want to add this to a gamepad, let's say that you're doing this on your own, you can simply add this another group to that, and you'll use gamepad. Let's go ahead and go down to the bottom. We're going to go down to gamepad face button. Now, there are a couple of different face buttons that we can use. You'll notice we have bottom, right, left, and top. That may not make any sense to you. Maybe you're using an Xbox 360 controller, or you're using a PlayStation controller to try and create these inputs. It's agnostic in this case. So if you're wanting to set the jump button to, let's say, the A button on the Xbox controller, you would use bottom. Or if you're trying to use the X button on the PlayStation controller, you would use face button bottom. Just to further that a little bit more, just to solidify that, if you wanted to set an action to, let's say, the B button on the Xbox controller, you would use face button right. Or the O button or the circle button for the PlayStation. That would also be right there. Okay, so you kind of get the idea there. All right, so we would set that to face bottom, and that would allow us to jump. Go ahead and remove that, as we're not going to be using the gamepad. All right, so now we've got all of our actions set here. Now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and basically set this to our default. We need to save this out. Now you'll notice that we have this set as default button, but it's grayed out. I want to go ahead and I want to save these key bindings, and I want to save them to my INI file. Okay, that is a file that is referenced by the engine and by the game to check for inputs. And so in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just export it out. Okay, now you'll notice here that it's trying to write a brand new file. I want it to use the default INI, so I'm just going to go ahead and left-click on that and just save over it. I'm going to go ahead and replace that, and we're good. Okay, so now we should be able to access these mappings whenever we go into our blueprint and start setting those up. So we'll get into that in our next lesson.